Hi, David. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Great. Thanks for joining. Now that we have everything recorded, we're going to go ahead and get started right at 6:05.
Just a heads up, the desktop version wouldn't let me join. It was giving me an error about a technical fault. I had to join on my phone.
Oh, interesting. Ryan, are you on your phone as well?
No, I'm on my laptop, but I have Teams, so I don't know if that helped or not.
Okay. Yeah, maybe. I know my Outlook was acting a little funny earlier, so I'm not sure if there's outages going on or what. Um, I'm checking my email though. Nobody has sent me an email about not being able to get on yet, so I guess we'll see. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, thank you so much for coming to our June webinar. We're really trying to do these monthly on just a variety of different topics related to disaster management here in the county. So my name is Ashley Morris. I'm the Emergency Management Coordinator here for Gillespie County in the city of Fredericksburg. I do all things disaster preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation for Gillespie County and Fredericksburg. And I'm super passionate about getting to know our residents, sharing conversations, sharing resources, but most importantly, just letting y'all know what emergency management is like in your backyard. What programs we're working on as a county or a city, what concerns our response agencies have, or as an emergency manager, what hazards we're trying to kind of fight here in Gillespie County, and also get feedback. So if there's anything that y'all think of during this presentation, ideas of different resources we can provide y'all, projects, maybe you want to see a certain kind of disaster reduction or mitigation in the city or the county. All of those things are super important. I really value resident feedback. So hoping everybody can get something out of this. And at the end of the presentation, there'll be some time for some questions and some feedback. And maybe y'all can help me decide what next month's webinar will be. So before we get started, since we have a smaller group, do y'all have any questions?
None for me.
All right. So let's get going. So I always like to kind of start with what emergency management is. I've been doing emergency management for about 9 years now. And while we work very closely with first response agencies like the fire department, the police department, the sheriff's office, 911 dispatch, we technically are not first responders in the sense that we're the boots on the ground. So I like to kind of code emergency management as more of a disaster manager or a master of disaster. We're kind of helping coordinate or helping multiple agencies involved in responding to a disaster all work together in one path, in one direction, and with the same resources. So trying to get everyone on the same page of what resources we need to purchase or use, trying to get multiple different groups all helping the residents in the best way that the residents need. And we're kind of more like conductors, while our response agencies definitely are the boots on the ground. On top of just coordination, so, running emergency operations centers, having briefings, utilizing alert systems, things like that, we play a really huge role in the preparedness phase. So trying to talk to all of our city and county government agencies and trying to make sure that we're all on the same page about what a disaster response would look like from the government at the county and the city level. So while I do work very closely with the first response agencies, every single agency and employee at the city and county level have some kind of role during a disaster response. This is really important too when you think of like finance and some of those other agencies where they're really important when we're starting to purchase things like, water for residents or response tools for certain different disaster responses. So my role is to get everyone together and to talk about what that plan looks like. We draft county emergency operations plans and review them. And then we typically renew our plans every 5 years and submit them to the state of Texas through the Texas Division of Emergency Management. And so we're actually going to be working on a giant emergency plan revamp over the next year. We have some new state requirements on what that looks like for disaster planning. And so I'm going to be really excited to share with the residents more about what that looks like, different planning scenarios we're trying to get at, and other things like that. Outside the preparedness phase, we do a lot of response. So when we have disasters or if we have a high risk of a disaster, again, we're trying to bring those agencies and all the response groups together. We're trying to purchase or order resources that they might need for rescue or whatever that might be. We're trying to send alerts and we're trying to document, because when we have disasters, usually there's a financial impact, but there's also a potential to get a declaration or basically a federally declared disaster where we might be able to get federal money and federal aid back to the government, which is really important, especially for us where, we've got some emergency money, but $1 billion disaster would definitely bankrupt a lot of local governments. So we really have to do a good job of documenting that and trying to get money back for that. We are also really involved in recovery, so damage assessment of public and private property in the county, doing debris management, cleaning up the roads, making sure tree limbs are out of the right of way, taking a look at long-term recovery in terms of needs. So that might be rebuilding residential structures or schools, but it also really could be mental health needs, spiritual needs, community needs, whatever our residents and impacted folks need to move on from that disaster. We fill that role. And then mitigation, really important, just trying to reduce disasters by passing building codes, taking a look at property buybacks for, maybe homes and floodplains and things like that, removing vegetation either from drainage systems or in areas of like high wildfire potential. But also installing generators, which we've done with some fire stations and some critical infrastructure after we had the Winter Storm Uri a few years ago that left us without a lot of power for a few weeks. So why are we here today? We are here because Gillespie County has a lot of threats and a lot of hazards. On the screen right here are just a few examples of some different natural disasters, natural hazards that we have here in the county. You can see some go back all the way to the 1800s, but you also see that we have some from this year. So for instance, hold on just a second. All right. For instance, you'll see we have Winter Storm Fern from this past winter. We actually did an Emergency Operations Center activation for that, making sure folks who needed rescued could be rescued from the icy roads. We also had the Nebo Mountain Fire just a couple of months ago, which was technically a county declared disaster. It was over 1,000 acres, and we got really lucky because we didn't have any lost houses with that fire. However, we did have a lot of property that was destroyed or damaged, unfortunately. Many of y'all are very familiar with Crabapple, which was another declared fire last year. And we did have lost homes and properties on that one. And then we all know that when we're not burning, then we're definitely flooding. So we have a lot of different river floods on our river and our streams. And it's something that we definitely have to keep in mind of when we're thinking of local disasters. So today, my goal is kind of to highlight personal preparedness. So how residents and households and community groups in Gillespie County can start to be prepared for any kind of disaster. Could be a fire, a flood, a hurricane, could be an active shooter, could be really any kind of big emergency that could impact you, your family, your friends, your loved ones. And so tonight, we're going to talk about a 4-step path to kind of meeting that personal preparedness threshold. 1 is stay informed. 2 is make a plan. 3 is build a kit. And 4 is to get involved. And for staying informed, that is the number one step, mostly because we really want residents and folks in Gillespie County to know about their hazards. If you don't know about what we're at risk of, and you don't have a way to know the threat or the hazard or the weather or whatever the threat is coming, then it's very hard for you to know, how to do an evacuation plan or how to protect your family, how to shelter, how to be ready. So tonight we're going to highlight a little bit of Gillespie County hazards so that everybody's kind of aware of what our top threats are and what we're trying to prepare for. We're also going to encourage y'all to sign up for the City County Alert System. So I've got some slides to kind of talk a little more about the multiple alert system options we have here and why both are valuable and important. We're also going to talk more about our social media. So I have a social media presence for emergency management, but we also have our law enforcement agencies, our fire department, and other folks who also are actively trying to put emergency information out for y'all to be able to stay informed. And then lastly, we do encourage folks to always check out the city and county websites. As many of y'all are probably aware, we have been very engaged with the New World screwworm response in the county, as well as just in the region. And so one of the things that we have done is we've created a screwworm webpage where we were trying to kind of store updates and different resources for residents. And so typically when we have disasters, we will do that. We'll either have a website where we can kind of keep updates and information for y'all, or maybe we might be sharing a state website that similarly collects all the links and the information for you in your recovery. So if you were here last month, we talked a whole hour about Gillespie County hazards and how to be ready for them. Today, we're just going to kind of highlight what some of those hazards are. So as I just talked about, brush fires are a huge hazard for us. Right now, we're very wet, above average, have a lot of rain currently. But before we started getting all this rain a couple months ago, we had a ton of fires. Some of those winter months in January, February, December, our firefighters were getting called almost daily for brush fires or out of control burn piles around Gillespie County. So it's definitely an important hazard to keep an eye on. And it's even more important if you are a rancher or you live out on pieces of land that just have a lot of that big grass you see right here. This is extremely flammable. And once all that vegetation dries out, especially like it is, out there right now, it's a huge fire hazard, and it can move pretty quickly if we get those weather systems in with really dry air and just a lot of wind. Like I mentioned before, if we're not worried about fires, we're typically worried about flooding. So we do get river flooding. If you take a look at the flood history through the National Weather Service, similar to the Guadalupe River, our river does the exact same thing. We've had a variety of different floods from the 50s to 70s. I think there was also one between the 80s and 90s where, we can get 20 inches of rain in Gillespie County, 25 inches. And it can fall right over the river to where, we can have really big river flooding surges, similar to last summer. So that's definitely something we want folks to be aware of, especially if you have property close to the river in the county. But we also want to remind people that we have a lot of streams. We've got streams in town in Fredericksburg that have low water crossings that flood pretty easily. And we also just have some other streams outside, in the Harper area, Stonewall area, Lukenbach, etc., that if we get enough rain, we're going to definitely see streams flood, and you're also going to run into low water crossings. Also, because we're in Texas, severe thunderstorms with wind, hail, lightning, tornadoes. We already had softball-sized hail in the northeast part of the county this year, up outside of Willow City, so we definitely know we can get that. And as you can see right here, this is actually the Stonewall tornado from a few years ago. I believe it was F3 maybe? I'd have to look it up for you, but we definitely can get tornado damage here. And then finally, we do have tropical systems here, mostly are flood threats. We also have winter storms, ice storms. And we do still get bouts of extreme heat and cold too. So staying informed, making sure that we have alert systems. For y'all, we have two primary systems that are really important. Our opt-in sign-in system, which you'll see that we promote a lot, where you're going to register and get calls, texts, or emails. But we also have this iPause system here, which is a federal alert system that automatically will ping your phone if you have the settings on. We're going to touch a little bit about NOAA weather radio and sirens, but I really want to focus on these two for sakes of time. So Gillespie County, Fredericksburg have one alert system where you opt in, which means you have to sign up to receive the alert. And we have ours through Civic Plus. So this is very much similar to reverse 911, where folks used to be able to reverse call through communication centers. For us, we can actually collect some landline data. And so we have some emergency landline data if you have a landline. But as many folks know, people are not having landlines anymore. And so if you have a cell phone, you absolutely have to go onto the city or county website, create an account, sign up with your cell phone, your address, and select what emergency information you want to receive. Our local opt-in system does weather alerts, weather watches, so you can be ready for the weather. We also have an ability to send you information. So if we have a brush fire, we typically will do a wildfire alert, letting you know that there's a fire close to your property. If we were to have a significant flood or any kind of significant emergency where you need to evacuate, shelter in place, anything, we would use this system to make sure that you got the information. And we do have an ability to also draw in the county the impacted area. So we try to really be mindful of who we're alerting, what we're sending. So you should only receive the information if it's valuable to you based on the hazard and where you live. Most importantly, you have to sign up to get these. So if you have not registered, please sign up, and I can make sure that all of y'all have the link after this. For iPause, this is going to be that federal system that, you guys get the Amber alerts that pop up on your phone and make that really loud noise. You also get maybe the tornado warnings that do the same thing. So this is a federal supported system that we have access to. It's separate from the other system I just talked about. And with this system, you actually have an ability to automatically receive any emergency alerts via the cell phone tower. The only requirement is you have to have your settings turned on in your phone. So when you go into your phone settings, you'll have emergency alerts, and you've got to make sure they're turned on. I do understand some people get a little annoyed with Amber alerts. I totally get that. And, that's definitely folks' decision if they want to turn on or off Amber alerts. But I highly recommend that you leave local emergency and the emergency alerts on so that you do receive these alerts when we send it. If we use the iPause wireless emergency alert system, that means that we are very worried about what is going on. It's for emergencies. We're worried about your safety, or we're trying to get really critical information to you. So it's really important that you have your alerts turned on. I do want to remind folks too, we do not control the delivery of this. The FCC does, and they have a partnership with a lot of cell phone carriers. And so sometimes you'll see like AT&T will deliver a little different from Verizon, and you also can have areas where folks outside the warning area receive the alert, even though we drew the polygon like this. Unfortunately, if it touches the tower area, it alerts the whole area. And so it's just really important to read the message and make sure that based on the location and the information that it applies to you. And if you ever have issues with that, you can always reach out to your carrier, who can always give you a little more information on how they're doing emergency alerts. So NOAA weather radio, these little radios are really great to have if you want to be informed of tornado warnings at night. If you're camping, or if you're down by a waterway and you want to get a flood warning, these are really great because they're battery operated and they will still work if we lose power. So we've been encouraging folks, especially recreationally or folks who have camps, etc., to make sure to have these NOAA weather radios so that they can know exactly when the Weather Service issues weather warnings for them. They are kind of in the range of $20 to $50 depending on what you're looking at, and it can be a challenge to program them. But if you purchase one, you can always bring it over to my office over here at Old City Hall off Main Street, and I will totally help you program it to make sure that you get Gillespie County alerts. I think it's really important to have a weather radio as a backup, and it's very valuable. And then EAS, we do have an ability through iPOS to send you EAS through TV and radio. Everyone's pretty familiar with the blue screen with the alert, the time, and all of that. Again, we only tend to do that for really dire, big emergencies, big evacuations, big life-threatening. And basically, we would draft the message, send it, and the news stations and the radio stations would cut in and push that out to y'all. So it's one way, again, to receive an alert and be informed, but it only really works if you have your TV or your radio on, unfortunately. And then sirens, I just want to mention that sirens are only for outdoor people. So sometimes folks kind of think that sirens, if it's flood sirens, tornado sirens, any kind of siren, that can be something that can help you if you're inside. That is definitely a no. They're actually only for if you're outside. Currently in Gillespie County, we do not have any kind of sirens. And even our fire department don't have like a volunteer fire siren to alert of structure fire calls or anything like that. So you're definitely not hearing any sirens from us. But I will say that will change because we are currently working to roll out some flood sirens as a part of the SB3 state legislation that just came out earlier this year. So we have funding, about $1 million. We're working on assessing some of our highest risk zones, and we will be having a variable number of sirens going up around the county. Once we have that information, we'll do some outreach so everybody is familiar with that and what it means. But we want to start doing the education ahead of time that, you really don't want to count on a siren to save your life if you're inside. It's really only if you're outside, if you're camping or something like that. Sometimes it can be really hard to hear if you're in a home or in a structure. And we don't want anybody to try to count on that. So again, alert system. So I hope everybody goes on and signs up for our alert system. We have some great new categories we're trying to push out: burn ban notifications, flood aware, where we're trying to really engage folks in floodplains to take preparedness before we get heavy rain. And then we're also working on an access and functional needs list where we can kind of remind folks who rely on medical equipment or power needs and things like that, to just, charge up, check supplies and stuff before we have really big interruptions with power outages and things like that. As promised, these are some other media resources. So we know that a lot of folks really love social media. And like I mentioned, we're really active on 4 different platforms. We have a Twitter, we have a Facebook, we have an Instagram, and we have a Nextdoor. So as you can see here, you can find us if you just search these on each platform. And we're really passionate in emergency management of making sure that y'all know what you need to know. Do we have a big call going out where you hear sirens through Fredericksburg? We really try to share that so that y'all are informed. If we have a brush fire, we really want to get that out just so y'all can stay aware, because with grass fires, depending on the day, they can move very fast, and we want to make sure that you guys have the information that you need to protect your land or protect your property. We also just try to share what our other agencies are doing. So the sheriff's office has a great page, city police, city fire, and of course, city of Fredericksburg do a great job. Outside of those, you can also follow local media. The San Antonio and Austin market will pick up our incidents. Radio also, if we were to push it to radio, I know our PIO here in town does a good job of doing interviews with our local radio folks. So we try to get info out during emergencies that way too. And then, of course, NOAA Weather Radio, which I hope all of y'all have. So once you're informed, we definitely want you to make a plan. So it's important to start with figuring out what your plan is, not only for your household, but also for your place of business or where you work. We really encourage folks to ask your place of employment what the plan is. You know, if you're not in charge of making the plan, somebody at your workplace probably is. And so if you ask your supervisor or whoever runs the company, hey, you know, what's our emergency plan if we have a fire, a tornado, you know, an active shooter? What does that look like for us? How can we stay safe here? I really love kind of promoting that to y'all to ask your place of business or ask your child's camp or your child's school, because it can really encourage folks to think about it if they haven't. So if maybe your place of business or your workplace never thought about an emergency plan, asking a question could really get them to start thinking about it. You know, maybe they think it's a great idea. Hopefully they don't assign the responsibility to you for asking the question. But it's just a great way to just learn more about that and think about it beforehand, because it can be hard to kind of think on the fly if you don't already know the best way to stay safe where you're at. We also want to make sure that y'all, you know, have your own communication plans internally with your own family and friends so that you can keep them in the loop, regardless on if you're at home during the disaster or if you're at work. And we're going to talk a little more about making family and personal plans with the next slide. So, one of the best resources for y'all is ready.gov, and this is a program that's been around for a long time through FEMA, and they have a lot of good review materials, planning templates and stuff for how you can make a family plan with the folks in your household. But like I mentioned, it's so hard to know exactly what to do in the moment. You feel adrenaline. Some people might, you know, freeze, kind of like a deer in the headlights. And we have a lot of studies that show if you know what to do or you think through it before, you're actually going to be able to do it better when you're under stress. So, you know, it could really save your life or, you know, make things a lot better if you think about what you need to do before you need to do it. Um, and keep in mind too, like if you go to ready.gov, you'll see that there are a lot of hazards. And even today we've talked, you know, wildfires, floods, tornadoes, active shooters, you know, cyber hacking. There are a lot of different threats and emergencies we can have in Gillespie County, and it can be very overwhelming. But we don't want our residents or our folks to say, man, this is too much. You know, I'm just going to be in trouble. So I'm going to give up. Preparedness can always be done just a little at a time. You know, where can we meet if we need to leave the house for a gas leak? You know, where's our family meeting space? Or, you know, if we have to leave our neighborhood for an evacuation, where are we going to stay? You know, for the night, for a week, you know, what does that look like? All those little thoughts can really help you when you're put in those situations and trying to figure that out. And we really want y'all to think about communication, again, between family, friends, and things like that, as well as shelter and evacuation. So for communication, this is a great list of different numbers that you can save in your phone. You can save in an emergency book or in a notepad, and you can keep copies like in your car, in your glove box, in your go bag, maybe in your desk at work. Just different copies everywhere just in case your phone breaks or maybe your phone dies. These are great numbers to have for emergencies, so you can contact your family. They could be local family, they could be in the state of Texas somewhere, or maybe they're out of state. Medical, so doctors, specialists, you know, pharmacy, all of that's really important. Your insurance. Insurance is super important because in most cases, if you're going to evacuate or we have a disaster, we're going to encourage you to contact your insurance right away. It could be at the shelter, it could be wherever you're at, but we want to really try to get your insurance plugged in immediately so that we can get you back to recovery and back to normal as fast as possible. So you might need to have that insurance on hand to be able to take care of that. Schools, childcare, things like that. Your workplace, veterinary numbers, and then utilities. So being able to know who is your gas utility, who is your power utility, what are the numbers you can call for gas leaks, power outages, all of that is super helpful to have as a part of your communication planning. And then also you want to think of the methods of your communication. So in a lot of disasters, we lose cell phone and signals. So you might not be able to call, but you might be able to text. Or if you can't call or text, you might be able to get internet somehow, maybe through Starlink, maybe through a different method where you can put on social media, hey, I'm okay. We really encourage folks to do that because when we have a disaster in an area, what we have found is a lot of folks will be okay, but your family and your friends who don't live here, maybe they live somewhere else in Texas, or maybe they live, across the US, they hear about the disaster and they immediately worry about you. They're trying to call you, they can't get a hold of you because the phones are down, and then they start calling dispatch. So we start getting a lot of calls, dispatch gets inundated. We try to activate phone trees and call centers to assist with that. But it's so helpful if you guys have a communication plan so that people just know you're okay. People are worried about you and want to make sure that you're doing okay. We also encourage things like landlines for folks who want to be able to put money into that. Landlines can sometimes work when cell phones do not. And also walkie-talkie apps and some other cool communication tools exist out there. And so it's really just what works best for you and your family. So for sheltering, there's two kind of different modes that we want folks to think about: sheltering in place and evacuation. For sheltering in place, that's so you can stay away from a hazard that's outside. It could be, a chemical spill where there might be toxic chemicals in the air. It also could be something like a tornado or hail or wind. It also could be maybe a dangerous person, an active shooter, something like that. So your goal is to go inside immediately, bring your pets inside, lock your doors only if it's a threat of someone getting in. You're going to turn off your airflow only if it's like a chemical spill or something where you don't want to get that inside your home. You're going to hopefully have a shelter room in your home in the interior, either a closet or something like that, and make sure that you have your emergency kit in that room, or you can easily grab it so that you can have all your supplies with you in that room. You also want to make sure that you have your information sources. So your cell phone, your radio, your weather radio, that needs to be kind of in that room with you so that you can get updates. And so also when you have it all clear and you're able to come back out. Now for evacuations, we really encourage residents to know as many routes out of your neighborhood as possible. And this is even more important for folks that have one way in, one way out. We know with different fires like the Paradise Fire out in California, as well as some other wildfires out in the West, that if it's one way in, one way out, there could be a lot of delay in terms of trying to get cars out of that one way, right? So if you know that you have a one way in, one way out scenario with your piece of land, with your neighborhood, you definitely want to take that into your plan so that you can leave as soon as possible. And we tell people that because we see with hurricane evacuations and even sometimes with fires, sometimes people will kind of wait. They'll get the evacuation alert on their phone, but they'll wait until they see the flames or they'll wait until they see the floodwaters from the hurricane. And by then, it is too late, especially if you have a one way in, one way out. So make sure that you leave as soon as possible. And I always like to tell residents too, if you ever feel like you're not safe, leave. Sometimes situations and incidents really can evolve quickly. Fire can move fast. And so if you ever feel like your life is in danger, it's always better to leave and come back than put yourself in harm's way. When you're leaving, you want to take your go bag full of cool supplies that we're going to talk about in a minute. You're also going to hopefully have a car full of fuel. So it's always good habit to make sure that you're refueling your car at half a tank so that you never go under half a tank. And then also, it's really important that you know your child's school or camp evacuation plan. We've been working really closely with the ISDs in the county, but also the camps in the county, to better understand what their evacuation plans are so that that can be communicated not only to our responders and us, but to y'all. When things typically happen at schools or camps, we know how worried parents are. So it's important that folks know what to expect. You know, where am I going to pick my kid up, or are they going to call you when they evacuate? Whatever that might look like. So making a kit, it's really important to kind of try to stock up as many things as possible. And so a really good list is actually found at ready.gov. It's got your traditional medications, food, water, um, clothing, toiletries, all of that. But once you go through that general list at ready.gov, it's also really important to think of you. Everyone is different. Everyone has a different family situation. We all have different needs. And so your kit probably looks a lot different than mine. And we also want to encourage folks too to think about pets. So pet supplies, pet food, all of that, as well as, infants, babies, all of those things. So that changes for different people. Some people have it, some people don't. Now, when we bring up emergency kits and supplies, we get a lot of questions about cost, especially today. Things are very expensive out there right now. And so what we encourage you to do, if you don't want to spend a lot of money on a kit, totally get it, but you can actually find a lot of emergency supplies at your house right now. So we encourage you to do a supply cache where, you do a house scavenger hunt and see what you can find. What are some old pairs of sweatpants or some old outfits that maybe you don't really wear anymore, but you can put in your go bag just in case you need to grab it and get out and you have something, right? Maybe some blankets, some different things that are just laying around the house that would be helpful in your kit if you had to leave immediately, and not have anything left in your home. You also can take a look at dollar stores, coupons, and we really encourage people to kind of build up with time. Nobody has, $500 to throw at an emergency kit right now. But a lot of people do have, a couple bucks here and there to maybe buy some spare AA batteries or buy a new flashlight or, buy a jug of water. And then we do want to remind folks that some states, like Virginia on this slide, but Texas, which we just had ours, have tax-free weekend. So next spring, we hope that y'all will participate in that and stock up annually on what you need. And then insurance coverage, we really want to encourage people to check their insurance. Based on how our disaster system is around the country, for people to truly recover from any kind of disaster, it heavily relies on if you're insured. And so if you have insurance, homeowners or renters, it's important annually to make sure to know exactly what you're covered for and to also do an inventory of your belongings where you're taking pictures, you're doing a cost assessment, or you're estimating what the value is, and you're putting all of those different things on a big list somewhere that hopefully you will have as you evacuate or after the disaster, because that's going to help you with your recovery. Usually when you have to do claim processes with insurance, they're going to ask for that. Hey, well, what did you lose? What items are we trying to reimburse you for? What were your damages? All of that. It's great, once a year if you go through your home and you can video record it, you can take some pictures, but just to have some kind of record of the big TV you just bought, or your fancy new laptop, or maybe your brand new furniture. And you'll be able to kind of help with the insurance process with that. It's also really important, because we have seen this before with certain losses and disasters, to make sure you're covered for what you're worth. So some people might only have $30,000 of coverage, but you've got $100,000 of belongings. Well, that's going to be really rough when you try to replace the $100,000 of belongings that you completely lost, but they're only going to give you $30,000. So it's important as you evolve your house, or you add things to your home, or you're buying new things, to check and make sure your insurance still covers the value of the items in your home. And then lastly, I really want to hammer flood insurance. So even if you have homeowners or renters, if you flood from rain, from a river, from a stream, doesn't matter, it will not cover flood. Flood damage, damage to your property, damage to your items. This is really bad because we typically see in Texas and around the country that our numbers of flood insurance folks are very low. And as we mentioned, for us, flood is kind of one of our top 3 hazards here when it rains. So keep in mind, if you think that you might ever flood, you've got a stream in your backyard, you've got access to water, you live on the river, whatever, just take a look at what the flood insurance cost would be. Because if you were to flood, even if it was that 1 in 100 or 1 in 500 or 1 in 1,000 year flood, everything is lost and you're not going to be able to get anything back. And we try to kind of assist with that, either through like nonprofit donations to help survivors, as well as trying to work with FEMA. But in most cases, even if we get a federally declared disaster where we might have FEMA assistance, a lot of homeowners are only going to get a few thousand. FEMA kind of tends to tell people it's a step towards recovery. It's not your whole recovery. And so we want to make sure that you really think about that, and that you try to set yourself up for as much success as possible with disaster recovery. So we talked about most of these, but if you had to take one picture of tonight's presentation, this is a great one. So these are things that you can do right now after this. Know your risk, which we already did. Pick 3 of the ways to receive alerts, which we talked about. Know where you would shelter in your home for a shelter in place. Know how you would evacuate and where you would go. Having supplies and knowing what your plan is at your office. Checking your insurance coverage, just making sure that everything's covered in case you do have a disaster. Inventorying, not only your personal office belongings, but also your belongings at home. And then also taking pictures, having backups and all of that of your important documents that you might need if you need to work with insurance, or if you need to file paperwork for like, FEMA relief and things like that. And then we also like to teach on this slide. So after response, recovery can take quite a while. If you take a look at even Hurricane Katrina, they're still technically doing recovery projects there. If you take a look at Hurricane Helene, they're still doing a lot of recovery out there. And then even, Kerr County, they're still doing a lot of debris management and a lot of recovery. So recovery can be really long and hard, but there are plenty of ways to start the process and try to get the process rolling as fast as possible, which is what our goal is for our community here. So during recovery or post-response, you really want to try to avoid unsafe conditions. So stay out of floodwaters if you can, because there's a lot of gunk in there that's not good for you or your health. You want to try to avoid being in a damaged neighborhood. So if you evacuate, or maybe a tornado comes through and we get you out of there, there might be a chance that we kind of cordon off that area until we can make sure that power lines are safe and it's a safe place to be. If another part of the county catches on fire, or takes a hit from a tornado, we really don't want residents driving through there for your own safety. We want to make sure that our responders can take care of that and make it safe again before people get in there to start helping with recovery. During response, we always encourage folks to help others. We have a lot of stories during emergencies of people helping their neighbor, helping strangers. In reality, when the disaster hits, emergency services are minutes to hours away sometimes. So we're always going to encourage folks to really empower each other to take a look at people and look out for people. Inform your loved ones that you're safe. So, like I mentioned before, let them know if you have access to text, if you can put it on social, if you can communicate it somehow. Your loved ones are really worried about you. And we typically see a huge spike in people trying to figure out if they're okay or not. And then we also want folks to seek medical care if you're hurt, but more importantly, take a look at your mental health care. And so we're going to do some talks later on recovery and mental health and all of those things. That can be something that can be prolonged. So sometimes the stresses of going through disasters, anxiety, depression, things like that can pop up months after a disaster or even years. So that might be something to keep an eye on. And of course, for us, if we had a disaster, we would have a recovery center where we would offer resources, nonprofits, churches, houses of worship, spiritual care, different things to help our residents make it through this hard time and through the recovery process. Like I mentioned before, recovery is long, so we definitely want you to start your process as soon as possible. If it's at your workplace, you're going to kind of follow what those steps might be for work. If it's your home recovery, you're definitely going to call that insurance as soon as possible because it can really take a while for them to get through the claim process and do all the documentation to get everything up for you. You want to take damage photos before you remove stuff, especially for flooding and for insurance purposes. And then after you take the photos and you have the okay from your insurance, you want to start working on cleaning up your house as soon as you can. With flooding, like in the picture, you can get gunk in your house, mold. It can be just a really nasty thing that's really bad for your health. So you want to work on getting that taken care of as fast as possible so that you can maybe salvage some of that. And we also want y'all to take a look for recovery centers. So again, we would open up somewhere, either at a church or at like the AgriLife building or somewhere in town, a recovery center where you can come and get help. You're going to be able to find different booths like Red Cross, Salvation Army, maybe some insurance agents would be there, spiritual care, like I said, and we're going to help with the process. This is especially true if we were to have FEMA, and this would be a federal disaster. We would have FEMA on site, and they would be able to help you with some of their very challenging application processes to make sure that you're applying for whatever relief that you're trying to get. And then lastly, before we open up for any questions, we really encourage y'all to get involved. Like I mentioned, disasters kind of take everybody. We definitely are planning with different agencies here, but I'm really passionate about training the community and training our residents in different disaster skills, first aid, all those things, because like I mentioned before, you're going to be the first person to react when you see a disaster or an emergency. You're going to be the one that takes action for yourself and your family. And then in many cases, you're going to be the one that might help your neighbor when you see something happen, or you're going to be calling 911 about it. Or so, our emergency system doesn't work without you taking the first steps. So we really believe in training our residents and helping y'all help us and help our community with disaster response. So first, encourage you to help with your own planning at work, but also to make your own plan. And then two, really encourage you to look at other emergency management organizations. So we work really closely with the American Red Cross. So you can do shelter volunteerism through them. You can also join our community emergency response team. So we're going to be starting a team next month where we're going to be looking for residents who want to volunteer, they want to help out during severe weather, or they want to help out during disasters with, shelter help or food and water distribution or helping us in our emergency operations center. So keep an eye out on that. You can definitely send me an email or give me a call, and I will let you guys know when we're ready for that. You also can join Team Rubicon, which is another really great disaster relief organization, and they actually deploy around the country. So if you were super passionate about wanting to help with disasters, you could actually join them and go to a California disaster or go to, a Kansas disaster, a different state, basically. And then to wrap up, we do have a variety of different trainings. We get a lot of questions about CPR first aid, and we're trying to work on starting a program like that. And so that's going to be something to look at in the future. We also have CRACE training, or active shooter survival training, that our police department in Fredericksburg is starting to do. So if you're interested in that, or having your church, your organization, or anybody host that, definitely check out the police department's Facebook or contact their community outreach person. CERT, we actually are going to have a training at the end of July. So if you're interested in that, keep an eye out for our announcement on that, and you can come train in town. And then annually, we work with the Weather Service to do Skywarn storm spotting, where we kind of teach y'all what to look for with severe weather, how to identify a funnel cloud or a thunderstorm and all of that. So with that, I've talked way too much, and I'd really like to open it up for any questions or comments or anything that y'all have before we wrap the webinar up. So any questions? And all of y'all are on mute also, by the way. So if you have a question, you can either put it in the chat box or come off mute.
How long does a CERT class typically take?
Yeah, so the CERT class we're going to have at the end of July is going to be done in one weekend. It's actually a 3-day class, so I think we actually start Friday night, but it's going to be 2 full 8-hour days, and you get through I guess it's like 32-hour class in one weekend. This fall, we're hoping when we have our team started that we'll be able to do some night training classes, because we understand not everybody is free on the weekends to do training. That would probably be a 4-week total class, but it would be every Tuesday or Thursday, once or twice a week for a couple of hours until you get through the 8 sections. So not too much, but enough to really teach you and get you confident to come help out during a disaster.
What is CERT training?
Yeah, so CERT training CERT is Community Emergency Response Team training. So our CERT trains in basic first aid. So, bandaging, stopping bleeding, things like that, splinting. We also train in basic fire suppression. So using a fire extinguisher. We train in basic light search and rescue. So nothing crazy, but being able to go into a building that's still standing and find victims. We also train in triage a little bit, and we train in disaster structure and documentation and things like that. We also, on top of the basic training, plan to give all of our CERT members the American Red Cross shelter training so that y'all would be able to help with shelters. And we're also going to add a lot of other training things too, like damage assessment and some other things that we really need some help from CERT for our disaster response in Gillespie County.
You may have said it before. I had delays getting connected because of the whole Microsoft Teams going through that, and I didn't have that yet. So, but where would I find this presentation afterwards? And will you be emailing it out to everybody that you have email addresses for?
Yes, that's a good question. So I did record this session fully. What we've started doing, since this is our second monthly webinar, is every monthly webinar will be recorded and loaded up on our Fredericksburg Emergency Management YouTube. So we have a YouTube page. You can go up and go through the playlist. You'll be able to find all the webinars there. I also can email it out because I have all of y'all's emails. So once I have it loaded up, I'll send y'all the YouTube link.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And in Fredericksburg, like what's the risk of the fires that we've been having around the area? What's the risk of those touching neighborhoods? And um, I'm not sure, like evacuation routes out of Fredericksburg area, where I know it would depend on where the fire was or where hurricane flooding, or not flooding, but you know, flooding, may be happening. But like in during the hurricanes before in the Gulf, I lived in the Dallas area, and everybody knew their evacuation routes. So where would you normally send people, like um, towards Dallas, or towards another big city where they would get lodging, towards Austin or San Antonio?
So that's a good set of questions. So I'm going to start with the fire question, and I will say yes. I mean, we have a very high wildfire risk. When we work with the Texas Forest Service, they pretty much tell us that we're technically a wildland urban interface. So we have a lot of neighborhoods and a lot of homes and a lot of ranches that are just surrounded by a lot of tall grass, a lot of flammable vegetation, and it doesn't take much to dry that all out, and then, a spark. So we've had fires even over the past 6 months that had structures and houses close to them. Our firefighters were able to protect and save all of those structures so far. But as I mentioned earlier, with crabapple, I believe we lost anywhere from 15 to 20 structures, which includes houses. So yeah, we really encourage residents to know their wildfire risk, especially if you live outside of the city of Fredericksburg. And we really encourage folks who do have pieces of property and land to try to control a little bit of that vegetation really close to your house, so that our firefighters can do some structural protection and they can kind of get up next to your house and try to fight the brush fire out away from it. Um, Other than that, I know you asked about flood evacuation. And so for us, we don't typically have set evacuation routes because depending on the disaster, the flood, or the incident, um, they could be blocked. And so we don't want people always thinking, hey, my route is always 290 West if 290 West isn't there or is flooded or something else. And so our plan would be during the incident, we would let you know what roadways would be open to go. And it would be incident dependent. So if it's a wildfire, we're obviously going to encourage people to go away from where the fire is and where the fire is moving. If it's a flood, we're going to try to encourage people to stay on highways we know have less water crossings. And so for us, sticking to the TxDOT highways, 290, 16 in certain spots would be best. We have a lot of county roads outside of that have a lot of low water crossings. And so we encourage folks to be aware of that and kind of plan around that, which we know a lot of folks do. As well as, or as far as sheltering goes, we plan for city sheltering and county sheltering. Currently, all of our approved shelters are in the city of Fredericksburg, and our backup typically have been our fire stations around the county. So that could be Stonewall Fire Station, Harper, Doss, Willow City. All of them have done sheltering at their stations around the county during the ice storm a few years ago and other things. However, my goal, hopefully over the next year, is to build more shelters out in the county so that folks in the county areas do not have to always come to Fredericksburg if they need a shelter. So maybe working with Doss ISD with some of their school facilities, working with Stonewall for sure, for some big facilities out there. Also working with Doss as well, even though, like I said, they already use their fire department. But so we would be definitely planning for people to stay if it would be safe. But if not, then we would probably usher people next door to the next closest shelter that would be regionally communicated.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
last year, with all the flooding that happened in July in this area, I know that there's state funding and plans to provide more warning systems, and that they're being placed in, the areas where the creeks are, especially around campsites and things. So how's the progress on that? I don't know if that's part of what you would talk about today or not, but I was just curious.
Yeah, so we are working really closely as a joint city-county planning group on that, because the siren system, even though the funding has been accepted through Gillespie County and technically will be managed at a county level, the city is equally able to have sirens and have gauges and flood alert systems as a part of that. And so currently our planning committee, with our city engineers, our county engineer, myself, our fire chief, police chief, sheriff. We've been meeting ever since I started. So December, January, and we've kind of been going through some of the state processes on identifying our high risk areas. We recently have been reviewing the Texas Water Board's high risk map, trying to validate kind of the areas that are high risk, and then also submit, I would say, some edits to them in terms of places where we know flood or places that maybe might flood or might not flood. So right now we're working on getting a finalized high risk map approved by the Texas Water Development Board. Once we're done with that, we've already been talking to siren vendors and gauge vendors just to get kind of general ideas of, what vendors are out there, what systems can do, what kind of power we would have for these systems. And so our next steps would be to kind of get a list of all those vendors, and then we're obviously going to do a bid process, a formal bidding process to select who would win that contract and then start doing deployment after that. So it's definitely been a long journey, just trying to put all of that together, but we're really hoping to have all of this done by the deadline, which is, I believe, the middle of 2027. So when we have updates on that, we definitely want to share that with y'all, especially when we determine the finalized locations of the sirens. And we really want our community to know where they're going, as well as what to do when they hear them. So there will be a lot of different community engagement and outreach and stuff like that too.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I see Rebecca said no. Thank you so much for coming. Anything from Ryan, David? Okay. Well, with that, I just want to thank y'all for giving me an hour of your time. I hope that there was something valuable with this. I'm going to send y'all a follow-up with the recording. And two, if you guys have any suggestions on different topics you want to learn more about, either with our disaster management program here or just in general, let me know so we can start to think of what we're going to do in July. But until then, everybody have a good evening, and I hope to see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.